Hi, and welcome to the OrgDev podcast. So, why do so many organizations struggle with structure and workflow despite constant change efforts? We redesign teams, introduce new processes, and roll out technology, yet work still feels frustrating, slow, and full of roadblocks. People waste time navigating silos, unclear roles, and systems that don't support how they actually work. So, why does this keep happening? Our guest today, Xin Yao, helps organizations navigate this. As a domain-driven design practitioner, sociotechnical architect, and former enterprise architect, she works at the intersection of people, teams, and technology, helping leaders design organizations that actually work. Xin has had a fascinating career writing software, architecting systems, and strategizing transformation agendas in multinational enterprises. She spearheaded large-scale change initiatives in boundary-spanning architects roles. She was chief software architect at Danske Bank, where they made the bold move to a Spotify operating model. She's also been enterprise and solution architect for the global consulting firm Capgemini. Xin is nowadays an independent consultant for YPMA, where she's focused on domain-driven design and socio-technical architecture in complex change efforts. And she's also a renowned keynote speaker. And this is one of the reasons why we invited her on the podcast, because we've watched all of her keynotes on YouTube and have been absolutely fascinated by it. She lives in the stunning city of Copenhagen in Denmark, and she's made time before she goes on holiday tomorrow to join us. Xin has a degree in English Literature and Linguistics at the University of Peking and actually started a whole year's military training at China's West Point Military Academy. Is that right?
That's right. Oh, wow. You picked up a lot of details.
We do a lot of homework. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Xin. We're really delighted that you can join us today.
So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Just to kick us off, just tell us a bit about the work that you do. We've got lots of questions.
So Karen said it so well. I am kind of that glue person. So usually my role is kind of a boundary spanning role, covering this crossroad between business, product, engineering, design, facilitating conversations and that sort of thing. So usually I'm independent, right? So clients usually hire me to lead a kind of a frontline work, which is typically a kind of I do a lot of software initiatives. So it's kind of a greenfield software project. So things that never existed before, or it's software that is like 2-3 decades old and it needs a kind of a modernization. So you can imagine a lot of people need to get together just to find out what the thing does sometimes. So that's my role, getting people into the same room, getting a lot of documents and people and processes into the same room, making sense of it, and getting to a better place, a more desirable future.
And one of the things you're described as is a domain-driven design practitioner. So for the audience, can you define what domain-driven design is?
So domain-driven design, if I scope it, it is the scope of it. Every design has a purpose. It's a design approach. It has the word design in it. So it's about the design of software. So to have quality software, where quality is defined as being both useful from a business perspective and maintainable from an engineering perspective. And so the approach taken obviously is domain driven. And so the secret there is sort of the domain driven part is basically to align the code language in the software with the business language. So if those two things are connected, then the risk of error and misunderstanding would be less. So in a way, it is a sociotechnical approach to software. And that predates actually Kinevin, 5 years, I think. But it's really a sociotechnical approach of designing software. I think it's kind of groundbreaking. Groundbreaking was, it was from 2004, the approach.
And how does that shape, how would your approach be different to the approach people might expect or might experience in other methodologies?
So other methodologies might take, so if you imagine, let's say we would like to have a piece of software that launches rocket or manages a hospital, right? Allowing patients to be having appointments and matching the doctors and patients and that sort of complexity. So in order to have all those business rules and the user's experience sort of defined and got understood by the software people, which usually don't know the domain at all. you need a way to sort of get that understanding from what we call the domain experts and the users into the heads of the software engineers. And so what usually happens before domain-driven design is purely, an architect like me. I wrote a long document giving people sort of the recipe or specification to say, go do this, go implement software like this. And because of those software engineers had no idea of, what I wrote was correct or not. And besides, the language I use when it gets to the receiver end might not have the same frequency on the receiver end. So they might misunderstand me. So the way domain-driven design tackles this is to say everybody needs to speak the same language, and that is called a ubiquitous language in DDD. And then we also sort of divide and conquer the complexity using some patterns like bounded context. So essentially, it's a way to say, don't do technology using a technical-only approach, but align the tech with the business and the users. Align the tech with the humans.
Fabulous. And that's not necessarily easy, is it? That can be a challenging place to be, trying to do that alignment. Yeah. What are some of the big challenges you face working in that way?
And so one challenge inherent in DDD, domain-driven design itself, as a design approach, the goal of it is software, right? It is the output, it's the outcome of that piece of software or, a set of systems that integrate with each other. So DDD per se doesn't have a design goal that is the organizational well-being, right? So even though it is kind of a sociotechnical approach in my eyes, it is the social part, the organizational development part, the OD part is a means to an end. And the end is software. So you can see that the social, practices in everything we do in DDD, a lot of patterns is for the sake of technology. So it's a little bit like the tail chasing the head and kind of situation. And that poses a lot of challenges, meaning that the OD in this field is under-theorized and under-explored. And that was the field I have been thinking, I've been doing a lot of extra work toward, tapping into different other kinds of system thinking, complexity theory, OD, and a lot of other things.
When you sort of see your explanations of it, it's just got a real elegance to domain-driven design, hasn't it? One of the things that really sort of stood out for me is before you often begin the work with DDD, so you're going to start with a big piece of software, you actually bring everyone together to actually agree definitions of things, don't you? So, we work in many organizations where the client might be described as a service user or a consumer or a client, all within the same organization. So often people are speaking at cross purposes, but you start with first principles there, don't you?
Right. Language is the starting point of DDD. And if you think about it, what is code written in? That's a programming language. So it's a language by itself. And so what is written when something goes to production? So when your podcasts go to production, when the code, the rubber hits the road, what is shipped, what is going into the production is the understanding of the engineers, those people who write the code and their mental models, the language in their head. There's already a gap between that and the code language. And then there's a further gap from there to where they get the requirements, the information from. And then from that person to the person up the chain who gives, that requirement specifier, the knowledge, there's a different gap. So the longer the chain goes, you imagine actually in the organization, the longer that language is going to drift. And that is a big challenge. So we do a lot of workshops, a lot of this thing called COMO, collaborative modeling. So that is to say, let's shorten this distance. Why do we have this chain of like a telephone game, right? Put people in the same room and let them speak their way into coherence, a coherent language, at least increase the odds of not, a better understanding that the code language reflects the business language.
And internally, I'm playing systems thinking bingo at the moment, and I think I've got a full house. There's a lot of systems thinking in there, isn't there, in terms of understanding how things work. And I think you've also, in some of your videos, you've described some of the system archetypes that you often come across there, like limits to growth and shift the burden. So these are sort of traditional archetypes that you see in organizations, and you often rub up against these things during your work, don't you?
Yes, indeed. So thinking in systems basically is actually a tall order sometimes because of this complexity we all face. And even in engineering organizations, I mean, the technical advancement is already a big mouthful. So you can see that in our everyday as technical people, like it's a tremendous amount of information from the internet, from our profession, and adding to it, we're asked to do, to understand, to relate to these complex business requirements to the user's world. And so if we do not have a kind of a systemic, system of systems, if we don't have some discipline to do that kind of thing, then we're going to have kind of a sub-optimized situation and silos, mental silos and organizational silos. So yeah, I do a lot of kind of like evangelizing, maybe that's not the right word, of system thinking, drawing feedback loops of how humans work, these system archetypes, and also the system traps. So we can see it. So sometimes when you can see something visually, then you also minimize the risk of me seeing a different loop than you. So basically that's kind of you can say the DDD plus. I see systems thinking as a DDD plus. It's kind of an add-on to the organizational side. So it doesn't become a means to an end, but an end in itself, in a way.
I guess one of the things I'm sort of really curious to find out is, particularly sort of working in the technology field, like the different groupings of specialists that you get, like they all, like the engineers, all go to particular universities. They all study in a particular way. It's often it can become quite tribal, can't it? So you're bringing these different parties together, like sales or risk and technology people and engineers together into this big melting pot. And you're trying to introduce like an overarching context that they can all focus on. That is beyond the power of a box of Krispy Kremes, isn't it? To try and get people to buy into it. Like how do you get people around the table to buy into this? Because they will have seen a lot of change come and go and a lot of initiatives that have had a lot of funding before fail. What is it that you do that sort of helps galvanize people to sort of work to this like common purpose?
It's not me. I have a big helper, and that is called complexity. So these people, before they go into the room, they already know that this is a piece of work nobody can, design or do and finish in their own office space. So if it hasn't hurt that way, there's no need to hire a person like me, right? So then you can just you can just top down, have a God view of everything and give everybody a piece of work, like we all know Taylorism, all that. But our reality has proceeded to such a level of complexity. So it has to be that way. So we need to bring people into the same room. We tried the other thing. It hasn't brought us the good result. So it's painful actually for a lot of these people. It's kind of like they're all busy people, right? Like you said. And so like in the beginning of the session, you see a lot of people looking at the watch, what's the agenda? It's going to add value for me, a lot of skepticism as well, right? So some of the get-go approach, so we've been in this field for quite a long time. So we found out, so some of these, what we call, I think you guys know this, so some kind of a liberating structure. So you can't bring like 60 people or even 10 people into the same room without giving them a kind of an enabling structure. Structure is constrained, but they also enable. So structures like event storming. So this is a workshop format. And in the architecture space, we also have quality storming. All these storming and these things, they have a lot to do with adding sticky notes, putting your thoughts on the sticky notes with a very low entry barrier. But then letting more insight emerge. So basically, let's say in event storming, we want to map this big hospital. How do we manage patients? This system has been in production for 20 years. And now it's full of errors and delays, and it gives the patient the wrong medicine and, all this kind of thing. So we need to change it. And it's a big ball of mud and all that sort of thing. But then, the users and the business person, the product person, the director and the engineer, the new engineer and the experienced engineer, they might have different ideas of just how the business process looks like, right? But then in event storming like this, you just write your perception using your language step by step on a piece of a sticky note. And then we just put each of our worldview on the board and then start to organize the timeline. So the moment people are asked to linearize something, And they start to see, wow, when they say user, do they mean patient? Or when I say medicine, or do I mean, the same thing as a doctor's assistant on that sticky note? So there's naturally a conflict coming up, but then we're pointing fingers at an object, not at each other. And it's actually a parallel process. You can see it's very productive, right? All of a sudden you have a lot of chaos. So it's basically the first step is chaos. And then you do some sense making and organizing it, discuss with each other. Is the sequence right? Is the language right? And then we start to clean it up and organize it into different sessions. So that's usually the starting point. Create a chaos, organize it, and get something out of it. That's 3 steps. Easy, right?
So Xin, fascinating to know this. What was your journey into your field? Is it something that found you, or did you find it? Like, how did it come about?
Oh gosh, I can talk hours about this. So I think my journey, the starting of it sounded like many other software engineers. Got my first major is in language, the English language, and then my second major is in computer science. And so when I was fresh out of school, I really had this Newtonian worldview, right? The world is a giant clock, and everything else is just like gears and springs. Everything compiles, precision, everything. That's what fascinated me. I think what got me going into this journey, the first step, it accelerated pretty fast, because my very first project, I was a programmer. And we were supposed to do this workflow, this insurance workflow. I was very proud of myself, just fresh out of university. I was together with, 3 other, also very young programmers. And so we were given this big document from our architect and another big document from the business analyst. So they basically collected the requirements from the users, right? So then we used 6 months chewing through all these things, but also, of course, asking questions per email. This is called the waterfall approach back then. So basically, the waterfall being somebody defined something, and then the next person refined it into architecture, and then we down the chain, at the end of the food chain as programmers, we just need to write code, right? So we were kind of like, I used 6 months writing code, and we delivered something really top-notch technically. And it's really a decoupled software, maintainable. Engineering-wise, I think it's a piece of art. But then I think 1 month after we have delivered, and that's a long time to wait. So what happened, right? And then our project lead, she actually was so embarrassed about writing that email. So she didn't actually have the courage to talk to tell us face to face, but the message is, this project was a mistake, basically. The code you wrote is going to be dropped and forgotten. And so there were a lot of reasons about, some of the reasons were related to those requirements not being clearly defined. But the thing that really, really was the determining factor was because our sponsor didn't talk to his boss about starting this project. So there was a lot of politics involved. And then because of the secrecy, no one told us that a front-end framework needs to be used. So a framework basically means that everything needs to go through that framework from the user experience layer to the back end. And since we didn't use that framework, their architects who reviewed our code, it's a lot of code, 6 months, right? And they said, well, it's going to be too costly to rewrite this. So let's forget about it. Just pretend as if it never happened. So that was actually my first experience. It's kind of after that project, I asked to be a software engineer because I wanted to increase my agency. Because at the end of the food chain, I've got to implement others' requirements and others' software architecture. So it's kind of like, in a way, it's a power-hungry move to say, I want to get closer to the decision. So that's what got me started. And so that's one of these experiences that got me into DDD. So basically, DDD aligns the business with the software. So that's my first shock therapy.
All those late nights, all that worrying and stress, and wanted to do an amazing job. And it was, oh my gosh, and you came back from that.
I came back and I got the permission to be a software architect. And so I thought my job would be, now I'm one of those writing the big document. Now someone else needs to implement mine. And then I just found out those, box and lines, the architecture diagrams, it's just like real architecture in a house, right? It's not so easy to draw because there are, in those conversations to understand what to build and why to build this and not that. and who is the person who can decide. So there is a lot of organizational intricacy and communication and politics. I felt that I didn't have a language. Even DDD can't help me do that, right? So it's kind of like, again, a thing that got me interested in complexity theory, systems thinking, inquiry, like psychology, the sociotechnical design, like the dance between psychology and sociology. How are people different in a group and then as individuals? So I went down a lot of rabbit holes. And then I started to, what should I call this thing? So it's kind of like, first I called it domain-driven architecture. I keynoted about domain-driven architecture, and then I started to talk about sociotechnical architecture to basically kind of put a distance between only domain-driven and then also sociotechnical. So there is more to sociotechnical than the domain-driven. So I think another leap is to go from system thinking to complexity thinking. Also, that was also a big shock for me. Like system thinking was still Newtonian in a way, right? All those feedback loops, they're neat, they're big and messy, but you still have a system. But then in complexity, you have systems, but you also have paradoxes, and you've got to have a way to navigate this. So that's oh yeah. So it's I don't know. I feel like many times I'm like a rabbit with the clock in Alice in Wonderland. It's just like, hey, we're late. We also need to learn this and so forth. So I don't know. It's, I guess, just my curiosity. My curiosity was my tour guide, my trip advisor.
How do you bring other people along with you? Because embracing that complexity and the mess that is the reality for organizations, not everybody is as comfortable kind of stepping into that, because actually some people like, keep it simple, make it, it might be wrong, but at least it's simple. How do you bring people along with you to kind of embrace that complexity?
Yeah, so I struggled a lot with it. So I tried the hands-on approach. I got the feedback that, it's good, but some of the packed feedback could be, Xin is good, but very academic, right? So and that means there's some things I don't quite get. And so, and then I basically tried a lot of different things. And then some of the patterns that do work, one of them that does work for me now is something I call change smuggling. And so in a way, it is just to say, not to go into a client space and not go into an organization to say, yeah, this culture sucks. You need to change. And I'm a change agent. I'm here to help you change. Just the energy to change something, to change a culture, tends to make it stronger. Nobody wants to hear that. And so one of the other reasons is also because I just don't feel I have done reps enough to be able to communicate as a professional, like OD professional or whatever. I still need training. So that therefore smuggling gives me a kind of a cover. I think Sonia Blichnaut, she said, it's hard to survive a jungle if you're trained in a zoo. I just feel like it's like Madagascar, right? When they, I think, out of Africa, whatever, when they first got to the jungle, it's just like, where is our, where's our cage, and who's gonna feed us food, and where is my, running belt, right? I think the zebra. It's just like. So I just feel I'm not a trained change agent. I'm a trained engineer, and I'm a classically trained architect. So a lot of times I just have to anchor a lot of these softer things, a lot of the sociotechnical change, theory of change in the what, in a concrete problem-solving context, and try different things, and then not to be so precious if things don't work out. And one other thing I have, that this is new learning, maybe from the last year, I just realized that what we model in this socio-technical space is no longer, what we architect is no longer causality, right? I know this from complexity, but sometimes when you go and do architecture, you want it to be deterministic. Who wants to have fluffy architecture, right? Who wants to say, okay, you buy a house and you hire an architect, and you say, oh yeah, maybe this will work. Probably the kitchen is best there. So you don't want that kind of language into your architecture. That is the social architecture we have to work with. It is a probably. So modeling probability rather than causality is also something I'm trying to talk about, because this thing engineers do understand. probabilities and causalities. So I call these things like Trojan mice. So instead of like a big Trojan horse, like this is sociotechnical change. You all need to change, every one of you. But then do this as small experiment. Like, let's try this inquiry. They use this in psychology. Let's try this. Let's formulate some questions. What might be, a question about our aspirations? What have we, some of these open questions and let's try this, right? And the ladder of inference and all different sets of tools. Some work better and some work not so good. Okay, then we drop it. We're not so precious about that. Rather than if you only have one Trojan horse to ride on and then it fails, okay, it's totally disastrous, right? So just try. I guess I'm just saying experimentation, massive experimentation, and also be compassionate with myself when things don't work. A lot of things don't work out for me. I mean, I can't even, I can't even mention how many.
Brilliant. And just, there's two questions that are burning in my mind. So one is probably easier to answer than the other. So the first question is, you talked about almost like an evolution in your thinking, and a lot of people here will be at the foothills of moving into systems thinking and starting to think about complexity. What were some of the things that helped you make sense of it along the way, going, now I understand? Because system thinking is a huge field, and there's one thing that systems thinkers can disagree on is that they don't agree on a definition of systems thinking. Where's been your inspiration along the way, and what's helped you make sense of the area?
Right. So so on the systems thinking bit, I think Daniela Meadows, that primer book, that really helped me, because I think that book advanced my perception of systems thinking as a pure intellectual, analytical feedback loop. That kind of mechanistic big system modeling approach to designers in the loop, the humans in the system, and also a balance between the intellect and the heart, the human and the system. So humans in the system. So that's and also, Peter Singer's fifth discipline. Systems thinking is the fifth discipline, but then he meshed it so beautifully with organizational learning, with self-mastery. So that piece really helped me. And then it wasn't until I read Ralph Stacey that I realized that this beautiful balance, or this beautiful paradox between the systemness of systems, so that the stability of a system, and the messiness of the system. And it's in the reconciling movement that gives us value. So it's not one side or the other. And it hasn't been so easy for me so I've been dancing between either, we need to model this huge system of systems, or we have to navigate the mess. So I was at a point either in the mess or in the system. But then from Ralph Stacey and Dave Snowden, it gives me this sweet tipping point. I'm always doing this. It's never still. So that's one of the things that really got me enlightened in a way. And most recently, Alicia Guerrero's constraints framework. And that beautifully, combines systems thinking and complexity theory. It's like everything is also change theories. So I felt there was some invisible hand helping me all the time when I needed. The doors just opened to new insight and so forth.
The second question I had is something that you just said at the very beginning of that horror story that you shared with us, which is the sponsor didn't have the conversations that they need to have. And sponsors play such an important role, don't they? Yeah, it's one of those things that's rarely trained. So, and sponsors generally are very busy senior leaders that might be sponsoring one or two or three things on top of a very busy day job as well. What guidelines do you have for what makes an effective sponsor, and how can people work better with sponsors to get the best out of them? Because it is a difficult role, isn't it?
It is. And so I have worked with fantastic sponsors and sponsors with a different orientation. So I think it's like I'm really fascinated by Greenleaf servant leadership. And I think many leaders intrinsic paradox. On one side, they want to serve, and on the other side, they also feel they need to have all the answers. And so it's a very painful position. Sometimes sponsors can get trapped into, I need to have the answers. I need to give people a direction. And I need to close down, right? So I feel self-awareness is Complexity, fitness are the two traits that a leader, a sponsor need to have. But then having said that, how do we work with people that are not there? How do we work with leaders with formal authority that are not there and we are somewhere else? We feel we really want to help, but they have a different orientation. In my experience, I mean, I'm not the person that that talks with these high-level executives to do leadership programs and so forth. A few times I did get some breakthrough, and that's when they can see there's a counter-narrative happening in the groundwork I'm doing. For better or worse, I'm always in this informal position, this boundary spanning role. I have a lot of exposure, like as the lead architect, and I do presentations for leadership teams. Once in a while, I got this, aha, really? You thought you worked this out with 2 workshops? Really? So it's just kind of like people start to wonder. I think, sometimes I just have to be patient to say the seeds are sown and it may not happen tomorrow, but unless that is there, I think it works better than intellectual persuasion, if you know what I mean. It's rolling out the red carpet. By the way, I really love the rolling out the red carpet text when I joined the meeting. So it is about rolling out the red carpet. I think leaders today are full of pain and full of paradoxes. And if they feel somebody's coming here to critique them and criticize them and not really can see their world and have a true compassion and understanding for them, you can never change anything. I think Carl Jung also said you cannot change yourself unless you accept yourself. That includes your addiction, your attachment, and everything, right? So acceptance is the first thing. It's another social paradox. You want to change something, but you have to accept it. How can that work? But it does work, right? It works for me, at least.
So just switching gears slightly, what do you love most about the work that you do? What brings you real joy?
Yeah, to use a buzzword from complexity, it's emergence, right? It's just like a jazz concert. Sometimes it's the blending of you come into a space with a fixed set of, jazz musicians, they have notes, music scores. So you have a plan, you have a beautifully written out plan and process and whatever. But then that's dropped into a real-time group experience collaboration. And through this inquiry, this process of inquiry and languaging and modeling, like Maturana calls it, something unexpected comes out of it. Surprises. Like people got clarified, oh yeah, I always thought you would say no if I ask our department to do this, but actually it's just because I didn't ask. You just said you're willing to do this. So a lot of assumptions got invalidated. So when this kind of things emerge and people start to get a better understanding about each other, about the why and the what and with whom and for whom, that's what really gives me this goosebumps, like I've made a difference. Disregarding what the software is going to be, I have made a difference.
And then you've got such an extensive toolbox of stuff you can draw on from all of your experiences and the kind of methodologies. How do you decide what tool or approach to use in a given situation?
I don't. I think the situation, I think it's kind of like part of it is because of experience. So when you have seen a few messes, there are similarities, but every situation is unique. And so sometimes I have to say, okay, I have this toolbox. These things worked in the other context, similar context before. Let's try this. And oftentimes people hire me to do, in December, I did this 2-week workshop, right? But then after day 1, so each day I made an overall plan. After day 1, I knew that the overall plan had to change. And that's because of the emergent factors. So I don't know all the bits in the beginning. So again, I have a musical score, but then I might have to, allow improvisations and changes to happen along the way. And sometimes it's really hard. When I do those workshops, it's like working until 10 o'clock each evening. And that's because it's a remote workshop. All those questions of inquiries need to be somehow put on the Miro board and get ready. So it's kind of very demanding. But I feel it's also very rewarding. It's just like, it's such a catharsis every time I feel like this is what makes me whole. When I'm in those workshops and facilitating these group experiences, I feel so whole. I feel so connected. And sometimes when those things are over, it's just like, oh, I want that feeling again. Where is it? I'm like a junkie. Right? No, but I think from using a system language, that's coherence. That's I think Maturana said this is experiential coherence. People experience in the moment that things cohere in the sense that I feel heard and seen and understood, and I know what is my power in the big picture. So parts connecting with the whole. So we may not feel like this in every workshop, and even afterwards, which what happened? Who put this? Who drugged me? Who hypnotized me in this collaboration? Why can't I feel this every day? Sometimes I feel like that too as a facilitator. But I think every time that happens, there are seeds sown, and this is what I call a counter narrative. And I think things work in mysterious ways, and those are the a breeding ground for real change in my eyes.
Thank you. Beautifully articulated. And so what are some of the more challenging things? What do you find really challenging about the work you do?
Yeah. So one thing you might also have maybe felt a little bit in the sense that I feel the organizational development professionals, like the OD professionals, or, some people call them way of working people, agile coaches, HR people, even sometimes this effort is happening like in parallel to the other, production work, creating software, design, and engineering. And it's kind of like silos, right? And I've been in situations like team are like saying, can we not have an agile coach? Because this is just extra time we need to put into, right? So it's kind of like, I think a lot of organizations tackle this in a not very systemic way, right? It's just like we have OD specialists, have these, they work with people in the social context. And then we have architects and engineers who work in the other context. I just feel like sometimes it's more efficient even to bring these things together. But I think these professionals haven't really worked out a way how to supplement each other's work yet at this stage. And many times the consultants, OD consultants and the engineering consultants are not working together. So that's one of the challenges. How do you feel about this? Do you, does this strike a chord, or is it only me?
I think we all feel that, the kind of silos and not integrating.
Yeah, and I think particularly in organisations, sometimes like the practitioners like OD and HR don't necessarily get involved in the business itself, where the real opportunities for change actually come. It's almost like we're drawing boundaries in the wrong place, aren't we? Like if you can actually work on something that's really meaningful, that makes a difference, but you need people like yourself to be able to bring those different areas together and sort of provide that interaction. Otherwise, it just doesn't happen naturally, does it?
No. And these sponsors, which we talked about before, it's like I think somewhere down the road, they might also challenge their consultants to work together. Why can I not hire 3 different type of consultants and make them co-design a group experience, right? So I often feel like alienated from like the people who are running leadership programs and coaching. It's like I often heard this like a by the way. Do you know that this thing is happening there? Oh, by the way, I can't go to your workshop because I need to be in the other place and we're doing this. And just like, okay, so it's just like we need a better way of working and meshing together our expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had it, haven't we, Danny, where we've actually worked with other consultancies, but the other consultancy is like, well, this is a little bit weird. How are we supposed to be with you?
Yeah.
So we're working really hard to sort of build that connection and share information. But obviously it's about the one common thing is the goal that we're trying to do for the client to get them to their goal, isn't it? And I think sometimes it's easy for consultants to lose their way around that. The main thing is to help the client achieve their goal. That's the most important thing.
That's true. And also I think one challenge for me, I haven't been independent for quite a long time, is contracting. What do you contract for? And in this messy space, it's oftentimes not so easy to describe a concrete outcome. And the clients who hire me all want concrete outcome, right?
Oh, yes. Well, you don't get any budget without it, do you?
Yeah. So what's the scope? Yeah. And so talking about emergence and paradoxes and maybe and probabilities, this is a language that doesn't resonate so well with the consulting, I don't know, practice in many ways. And I think so one of my favorite books is Peter Block's Flawless Consulting. In there, he talks a lot about this kind of contracting. And I think even though that book is quite old by now, but well, a lot of this, the good gold nuggets there are not really implemented yet. So I'm just still trying to fumble my way. That's one of the challenges, like having a conversation about contracting, the real contracting. How can I not smuggle anymore, break my cover? When can I break my cover?
We've got some great terms from this conversation today.
Brilliant.
What have been some of the biggest lessons you've learned along the way?
One of my biggest lessons is actually to not to make assumptions about what people's needs are, especially about for instance, how can I assume people's assumption about what a good job is, right? So, and sometimes I go all in with this tool set, with the modeling, with the every engineer has this global worldview, the big picture, the user and whatever. And sometimes people are just satisfied with, having a ticket. And maybe the other thing is just too complex. And so I think one of the biggest lessons is to, again, start to accept that people are at different places and find a language that works for them rather than feeling rejected, as an idealist, that people don't really buy into this and so forth. So that's really so one of the things I've also been doing a lot of study about Buddhism in late years. So this concept about loving speech. So basically to say you need to find out a vocabulary that works for your conversation partner rather than seeing him or her as an abstraction. So it's not an object you are having an argument with, but a human being that has pains and hurts. But so once that lesson is really sticking with me, I think I can get deeper with this process. And I have got so many lessons, like this event storming. I described it like it's a silver bullet, right? It did. But you might have heard it. I talk about, I have several disastrous event storming experiences. And most of them is because I assumed that people need this. Why don't you like this? It just works, right? But, some people are just like, I got this too, I think, in the retrospective, I still remember this. One person wrote, "We don't see forest, only trees." And the other person said, "You," meaning me, "you are too in love with your model." Talk a lot about model, but event storming is a model, right? So that a twist, an inquiry, another meeting of inquiry to get back to trust and understanding. But I think change practitioners, sometimes we are fascinated with our models, especially the models that have worked in many other contexts. But then I think the biggest lesson is basically to really fall drunkenly in love with these models. And then you have to detach. You really have to detach, right? Learning your skills, it's like the shuhari, the Japanese martial art. Unless I learn to detach and people learn to detach, we're not going to acing our own martial art to the highest level. It's kind of down a rabbit hole. Sorry, I hope it somehow makes sense.
But it is really important, isn't it? Because I think I always remember being told by one of my sort of mentors is hold your hypotheses lightly. Don't get too attached to it, because you don't know, and there's always new information coming through. And I think sometimes when you are a facilitator, it's easy to build a repertoire. That's the thing, and it works in this order. But like I said, every context is different. Every team starts in a different place. There's different levels of trust, and they have to engage in it in a certain way. So we're always having to think about what's the recipe and how do we make it in a slightly different way each time. And that's what brings the variety, isn't it?
Yes, and I think that the best model, which is not a model, is actually deep questioning or inquiry, because those are in the moments. Some of them, you might have a recipe for asking some of these questions. I think, it reminds me of, so Jacob Needleman is a philosopher. He basically said, our society has tended to solve its problems without experiencing its questions. So the questions, how to ask those questions in the moment and then, arriving at a kind of an improvised coherence. That's the art. It's no longer a craft. And I think as OD professionals and as change practitioners, that's the place we need to get to, and that's a place that requires both our mind and our heart. So yeah, so I'm not there yet, but I feel I'm being enabled by the complexity itself. I'm being carried by all these different contexts. Still learning. So.
Which brings us neatly to our next question. So you've obviously got a huge appetite for learning and kind of developing and refining your practice. What does your development and learning look like at the moment? What are you particularly kind of focusing on?
So this might sound a little sentimental. I'm trying to learn to accept being stuck is as interesting as being unstuck, and maybe a prerequisite, because on a lot of things I feel I'm an overachiever still. So with all this curiosity and with all this philosophical sentiment, I'm still an overachiever. I don't like experiences with the engineering person in me sees as a failure. Still, I feel that I have to work with myself. If I have to preach that our teams and the people I work with need to go for uncertainty and needs to embrace multiple truths. So do I. So it's just, it's very, very hard it's a hard lesson. I can give you an example. So one of the clients last year, we had very different orientations. When we parted ways, I asked for feedback, and he gave me, so the sponsor, the leader, gave me a very friendly piece of advice. He said, Xin, you might meet another person like me in a different context. So don't try to open things up. Others are trying to close down, right? So basically that has two messages for me. So one, his orientation. The other is that he didn't feel understood, he didn't feel that the way he sees the world was accepted by me, and the way I went about solving his problems was not in line with his expectations. So I might throw in, like Peter Block used to say, yeah, your expectation is too low. But, still, I didn't succeed. I got stuck. Basically, I got stuck, and I didn't get the opportunity to get unstuck in that environment. But that's a huge lesson for me. Without that one, I don't think I can. So that experience, it's kind of like, I will never forget it. In a different context, I will totally approach it differently, would drop some of my passion, drop some of my change energy, and go about it in a different way. And so in a way, getting stuck in that context is worth everything, is really worth everything. And still I'm having, this feeling of, lack of self-worth, all this internal dialogue going on, right? So yeah, so that's what I'm learning right now still.
Amazing. Well, we just want to say a huge thank you, Xin. That was just such a incredibly well-articulated, just really insightful interview. It's just been brilliant. And you've articulated so many of the struggles that go on internally within OD practitioners, but in such a really well-described way. So thank you. Danny, what are some of the things that you're taking away from the conversation?
Where to start? We could do another hour just reflecting on on the insights. So I think what you said up front about the importance of ubiquitous language and really kind of creating those bridges between people is so fundamentally important to all the work that we do, whether it's in a technical space or kind of elsewhere. Embracing the creative chaos, I love that, and obviously the change smuggling and Trojan mice going to stick with us as kind of brilliant ways of summing up what we do.
Brilliant. Yeah, and for me, loads of, I just love the language. I think complexity mice, and if you want to live in the jungle, don't train in a zoo, which is just fantastic.
Oh, that's Sonia. It's just I think metaphors work very well in this space, help us a long way, right? So
incredibly well, yeah. But I think, one of the things we really wanted to bring you on today is just to broaden people's world in terms of there's people doing really huge, meaningful, significant work, and it's the importance of building connections. And there are so many opportunities to create change that actually is useful to the organisation. So you encourage them to reach out. And just the way you've talked about how you bring people together, like how you sort of create people from different tribes and different backgrounds, and how you can actually create a higher context for people to follow. So it's been brilliant. I've just really enjoyed it. If people want to follow your work, if they want to understand a little bit more about what you do, or if they want to reach out to you and understand a little bit more about the work you do as your independent consultancy or keynote speaking, what is the best way for people to find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn at Xin. So it's, I have a Chinese background, so Xin means the mind, heart. So my first name twice, and I'm on Blue Sky after Twitter and X. So that's where you can find me. Otherwise, there are a lot of recordings on YouTube of my talks, and if you have time to dig into that, yeah.
Brilliant. We'll make sure all of those things are in the show notes, and we'll definitely will signpost YouTube videos because they are brilliant. So thank you so much. We're stopping you from going on holiday to a hot island. so escape the Copenhagen winter. So we hope you have a lovely time. Thank you so much. For those of you that are watching it, if you've watched this and you think, I know someone that would really appreciate this, then please share it. We get stats every week that are showing loads of people are sharing loads of the videos. So across sectors, so people are finding lots of value. So if you've also liked it, then please subscribe to the channel and also give it a like because the algorithm gods love it as well. And also, if you want to keep up to date and you'll be aware when other videos like Sin's come out, then you can subscribe to the newsletter, which is in the show notes as well. But thank you so much. But most importantly, thank you so much, Sin. We've loved it. We've learned, which is our barometer of a good session. Yeah. So thank you.